the twin suns of Tatooine beat down with a familiar, oppressive heat, searing the endless dunes of sand into a shimmering, indistinct horizon. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, it was a landscape of penance. Each grain of sand was a memory, each gust of hot wind a whisper of failure. He sat on a rocky outcrop, the worn brown fabric of his robe a stark contrast against the pale stone, and watched the distant moisture farm. The Lars homestead. A place of fragile hope in a universe drowning in despair. In his arms, wrapped in a simple linen cloth, a baby slept. Luke. The son of Anakin Skywalker. The son of the man he had loved like a brother and had been forced to leave for dead on the black shores of a volcanic world. The weight of the child was nothing compared to the weight in his soul. He could still feel the searing heat of Mustafar on his skin, still hear the anguished, hate-filled screams of his fallen friend. "I hate you." The words were a brand on his heart, a constant, burning reminder of his greatest defeat. He had brought the boy here to be safe, to be hidden from the monstrous new empire and from the father who had become its black-hearted enforcer. The plan, conceived in the desperate moments after the galaxy's fall, was simple. He would leave the child with his step-uncle and aunt, Owen, and Beru Lars. He would watch over him from a distance, a silent guardian in the wilderness, waiting for the day when the galaxy might need a new hero. It was the Jedi way. Detachment. Patience. Observation. It was the way that had failed Anakin. The thought struck him not like a lightning bolt, but like the slow, grinding pressure of a tectonic plate. He had trained Anakin. He had taught him the ways of the Force, the mechanics of a lightsaber, the philosophies of the Jedi Order. But had he truly guided him? Had he been the brother Anakin needed, or just the master the Council demanded? He had held to the code, to the rules of non-attachment, while his apprentice, a boy ripped from his mother and thrown into a galactic war, had slowly been consumed by his fear of loss. A fear Obi-Wan had seen, had acknowledged, but had never truly helped him conquer. He looked down at the sleeping infant. Luke stirred, his tiny face scrunching for a moment before settling back into peaceful oblivion. He had his father's face, a soft, innocent echo of the friend he remembered from their earliest days. In this child was a chance for redemption. Not just for the galaxy, but for him. To do it right this time. Watching from a distance was not enough. It was a passive hope, a prayer sent into the uncaring desert. It was leaving the boy's destiny to chance, to the whims of the same uncaring force that had allowed his father to fall. No. He could not make that mistake again. He could not stand by while another Skywalker grew up unaware of the power within him, vulnerable to the same darkness that had claimed his father. His legs, stiff from hours of sitting, protested as he stood. The decision settled in his heart, solid and heavy and right. He would not be a distant watcher. He would be a teacher. A guide. A presence. He adjusted the sleeping child in his arms and began the long walk across the flat expanse towards the sunken courtyard of the Lars homestead. The suns were beginning to dip towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to claw at the ground before him. It felt like walking out of a tomb and into the uncertain light. Owen Lars was not a man given to flights of fancy. He was a man of the earth, of condensers and vaporators. His reality was measured in liters of water and the price of power converters in Mos Eisley. So when the old wizard who had appeared on his doorstep with his step-nephew announced his intention to stay, Owen's reality buckled. "Absolutely not," Owen said, his voice as flat and hard as packed earth. He stood with his arms crossed, a barrier of simple, stubborn muscle between the Jedi and the home. "You can leave the boy, as we agreed. Beru and I will raise him. But you will go. Your business is done." Obi-Wan stood in the dusty courtyard, the baby now cradled in the arms of a stunned but gentle Beru. He looked at Owen, and for the first time in many years, he did not see a simple farmer. He saw a man terrified, a man trying to protect his family from a universe that had already taken so much from him. He saw the shadow of Anakin's own possessive fear in Owen's eyes. "Owen, I understand your hesitation," Obi-Wan began, his voice calm, measured. "You believe my presence will bring danger. You are not wrong. But the danger is already here. It is in his blood. The boy is strong with the Force. To leave that power untrained, untended, it would be a far greater risk. It would leave him vulnerable to the very thing you fear." "I fear you, Kenobi," Owen shot back, his finger jabbing in Obi-Wan's direction. "I know what happened to his father. I know what happened to my father. The worlds you Jedi walk are filled with war and death. I want Luke to be a farmer. I want him to be safe. I want him to have a life, not some crusade." Beru, who had been quietly soothing the baby, finally spoke. Her voice was the cool water to Owen's desert heat. "Owen, listen to him." She looked from her husband to the Jedi Master. "The boy, he's special. I can feel it. We can't just ignore that. What if the man is right? What if hiding it makes things worse? Worse than having a Jedi hermit drawing every bounty hunter and Imperial spy from here to the core worlds?" Owen scoffed, though his anger was tempered by his wife's words. Obi-Wan saw his opening. This was not a negotiation with a Senate committee. It was an appeal to a family. "I am not asking to take him," he said, his gaze soft as he looked at Luke in Beru's arms. "I am asking to be near him. Let him be your son. Let him have the life you want for him. A childhood. A home. But allow me to be a part of it. A friend. An uncle. When he is old enough, I will teach him to control what is inside him. To understand it. Not for war, Owen. For peace. For his own peace." He took a step closer, his hands open in a gesture of supplication. "I failed his father. I will not fail him. Give me this chance. Let me help you protect him. I will live in the Jundland wastes. I will keep my distance. But I will not be absent. Not again." The setting suns painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air grew cooler. Owen looked at Beru, who gave him a small, pleading nod. He looked at the child, so small and innocent. He looked back at the weary, haunted face of the Jedi. He saw a man not seeking power, but seeking atonement. The farmer in him screamed against it, against the complication, the danger. But the man who had just accepted a son could not entirely deny another man's plea for redemption. "You stay out of sight," Owen finally ground out, the words tasting like ash. "People know me here. They know Beru. A stranger hanging around will bring questions. You live out in the wastes. You want to watch him? Fine. But he's our boy. My boy. You will not fill his head with foolish ideas about star pilots and adventures. He will know only the life you give him," Obi-Wan promised, a wave of profound relief washing over him. "Until the time is right. And you have my word, I will do nothing to endanger this family." It was a fragile truce, a compromise born of fear and a sliver of hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the great Jedi Master, hero of the Clone Wars, would become Ben, the strange old hermit in the desert. He had found his new watch. But this time, it would not be from a distance. This time, he would be close enough to feel the heat from the fire. The first few years were a study in patience and restraint. Obi-Wan established a simple, Spartan home for himself in a hollowed-out rock formation deep within the Jundland wastes, miles from the Lars homestead. It was a place of meditation and solitude, a place where he could commune with the Force and grapple with the ghosts of his past. He spoke often with the spirit of his old master, Keegan Jin, whose presence in the living Force was a comfort and a guide. Keegan's voice was a whisper on the wind, a feeling more than a sound. "Patience, my old Padawan. The living force flows through all things. The boy is a part of it. Feel his presence, but do not smother it. Obi-Wan heeded the advice. He kept his promise to Owen. His visits were infrequent at first, timed to coincide with trips to Anchorhead for supplies. He would appear at the homestead not as a mystical warrior, but as a friendly neighbor, old Ben Kenobi. He brought small gifts, a polished japer snippet he'd carved, a rare desert flower he'd found blooming in a shady canyon. Beru always welcomed him with a warm smile and a glass of blue milk. She saw the quiet sadness in his eyes and the genuine affection he held for Luke. She became the bridge, smoothing over the rough edges of Owen's continued suspicion. Owen, for his part, remained wary. He would watch Ben interact with Luke, his expression a mask of stern disapproval. He saw how the boy was drawn to the old man, how his eyes would light up when Ben told a story. They were never stories of war or Jedi, but fables and myths, tales of clever animals and wise old spirits of the desert. Each one held a lesson, a subtle introduction to the core tenets of the Jedi philosophy: patience, compassion, awareness. When Luke was 4, a crate dragon, driven from its hunting grounds by a territorial dispute, wandered too close to the homestead. Its terrifying roar echoed across the flats, sending the Banthas into a panic. Owen grabbed his blaster rifle, his face pale but determined. "Beru, get Luke inside." But before he could take more than 2 steps, a figure appeared on the ridge overlooking the farm. It was Ben. He stood there, a simple man in a brown robe, and raised a hand. He made no sound that Owen could hear, but the crate dragon, a creature of immense size and ferocity, suddenly stopped. It tilted its massive head, let out a low, confused rumble, and then turned, lumbering back the way it had come. Ben simply watched it go, then turned, and met Owen's stunned gaze from across the 100 meters of sand. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then vanished back into the rocks. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He hadn't uttered a word. He had simply persuaded the beast to leave. That night, Owen was quiet at the dinner table. He looked at Luke, who was happily playing with a toy skyhopper Beru had bought him. He looked at his wife. He said nothing of what he'd seen, but a shift had occurred. The fear of Ben Kenobi remained, but it was now mingled with a grudging respect. The hermit wasn't just a danger, he was also a shield. As Luke grew, so did his connection to the world around him. He was a curious boy, with a boundless energy that often tested his aunt and uncle's patience. He had his father's hands, a natural talent for mechanics. He could take apart a droid caller and put it back together before he could properly read. Owen, seeing a practical skill he could nurture, encouraged this. It kept the boy grounded. Ben's visits became a bit more regular, perhaps once a month. He would sit with Luke in the garage, watching him tinker. "A machine is like a puzzle," Ben would say, his voice a gentle rumble. "You cannot force the pieces to fit. You must feel where they belong. Close your eyes, Luke. Feel the shape of it. Feel the connection." Luke would scrunch his eyes shut, giggling. "I can't feel it, Ben. I have to see it." "Ah, but you can," Ben would insist with a smile. "Everything is connected. The tool in your hand, the gear on the bench, the intention in your mind. Quiet your thoughts. Listen. Not with your ears, but with everything else." These were the first lessons. They were seeds of force awareness planted in the fertile soil of a child's mind, disguised as simple wisdom. Luke didn't know he was learning to expand his consciousness. He just knew that sometimes, when he did what Ben said and got really quiet, he could find the dropped screw without looking, or know which motivator was about to fail before it even sparked. He thought it was just a fun trick Ben had taught him. When Luke was 8, he was racing his small T-16 Skyhopper model through Beggar's Canyon with his friends. He was a gifted pilot, even with a toy. He pushed the model faster and faster, weaving through the stone needles with a grace that left his friends in awe. But he pushed too hard. Taking a turn too sharp, the model clipped a rock, spiraled out of control, and plunged into a deep, inaccessible crevasse. His friends groaned in disappointment. "It's gone, Luke. You'll never get that back." Luke's face fell. His uncle had helped him build that model. He scrambled to the edge of the chasm, peering down into the shadows. It was too far, the walls too sheer. He felt a lump form in his throat. He had been reckless. He had lost it. He sat there long after his friends had given up and gone home. The suns began to set. He thought of Ben's words. "Quiet your thoughts. Feel the connection." It seemed silly. It was a toy, not a puzzle piece. But he was desperate. He closed his eyes. He tried to imagine the skyhopper. He remembered the feel of the controls, the weight of it in his hands. He tried to listen as Ben had said. For a long moment, there was nothing but the wind and his own disappointment. Then, a flicker. A tiny spark in the back of his mind. Not a thought, not a sound, but a feeling. A sense of presence. It was down there, in the dark. He focused on it, holding on to that faint feeling. He reached out with his hand, though he knew it was pointless. He just reached. A scraping sound echoed from the chasm. Luke's eyes snapped open. A small pebble skidded past the edge. He held his breath. Another scrape. Then, slowly, impossibly, the nose of his T-16 model appeared over the lip of the crevasse. It hovered there for a second, covered in dust, and then tumbled onto the rock at his feet. Luke stared at it, his heart pounding. He looked around. Was someone there? Had someone thrown it up? He called out, "Hello." Only the wind answered. He picked up the model, his hands trembling. It wasn't a trick. It was real. He ran all the way home, his mind racing. He didn't tell Owen or Beru. He knew, instinctively, that they wouldn't understand. The next time Ben visited, Luke pulled him aside, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Ben," he whispered, clutching the older man's robe. Something happened. Something strange. He told him the story. Ben listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When Luke was finished, Ben knelt down, putting a hand on his shoulder. "There are more things in this galaxy than can be seen with the eye, Luke. You did not force it. You listened. You reached. And it answered. That is a great gift." "But how?" Luke asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It is the energy field," Ben said, using the term for the first time. "The Force. It is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together." He looked Luke directly in the eyes. "And it is very strong with you." It was the first time the truth had been given a name. Luke didn't understand it all, not even a fraction of it. But he wasn't afraid anymore. It was a part of him. And Ben, his quiet, wise friend, understood it. From that day on, the lessons became a little more direct. The meditations were no longer just for finding lost screws. They were for feeling the life in the desert around them, for sensing the scurrying womp rats in their caves, for feeling the twin suns on his skin. Obi-Wan was building a foundation. Not of dogma or rules, but of feeling, of instinct, of connection. He was teaching Luke to be a part of the world, not to stand apart from it. He was immunizing him to the loneliness that had so corroded his father's soul. Luke Skywalker was not an isolated farm boy dreaming of the stars. He was a child of the desert, grounded in family and friendship, slowly, carefully, being taught to wield the universe itself. the years between 8 and 16 were a delicate balancing act. To the outside world, Luke Skywalker was Owen Lars's nephew, a quiet but preternaturally skilled mechanic and a pilot who could outfly anyone his age in a skyhopper. He was a good boy, respectful, hardworking, though he had a far-off look in his eyes sometimes, as if listening to a song no one else could hear. He spent his days repairing vaporators and his evenings staring at the twin suns, but his dreams were not of escape. They were of balance, of understanding the strange energy that hummed beneath his skin. His training with Ben continued in secret, woven into the fabric of his life. A trip into the Junland wastes to hunt for mushrooms for Beru's stew became a lesson in tracking, not with his eyes, but with the Force. "Do not look for the mushroom, Luke," Ben would say, sitting on a sunbaked rock while Luke searched. "Feel its life. Feel how it draws moisture from the rock. It is connected to the land. Find the connection, and you will find your quarry." A session in the garage repairing a faulty motivator became a lesson in telekinesis. Ben would sit nearby, seemingly dozing, and a needed hydrospanner would float gently from a high shelf into Luke's waiting hand. At first, Luke thought it was Ben doing it, a silent helper. But Ben would just smile. "I did nothing, my boy. The Force provides what is needed. If you are open to receiving it." Luke learned to quiet his mind, to focus his intent, and soon he could summon small objects himself, a flicker of concentration all it took to bring a bolt or a washer across the room. Owen watched this all with a deep and abiding unease. He couldn't deny the results. Luke was responsible. He didn't shirk his chores. He didn't speak of leaving. But the boy was different. There was a serenity to him that was unnatural for a teenager, a focus that was unnerving. He would see Luke meditating in the shade of the homestead, perfectly still, and it would send a chill down his spine. It was the wizard's work. He would confront Beru about it, his voice a low grumble. "He's filling his head with nonsense, Beru. Feeling the connection, he should be feeling the grit on his hands from a hard day's work. That's real. Is he a bad son, Owen?" Beru would ask calmly, not looking up from her cooking. "Does he disrespect you? Does he cause trouble?" "No, but..." Owen would stammer, unable to articulate his fear. It wasn't what Luke did, but what he was. He was Anakin's son. He was the wizard's apprentice. He was a bomb, and Owen felt like he was living his life waiting for it to go off. The first true test of that foundation came when Luke was 14. He and Ben were in a remote canyon, a place of strange, echoing silence where the Force was particularly strong. Ben had finally decided it was time. From the folds of his robe, he produced a cylinder of metal and chrome. It was elegant, weathered, but still humming with a latent power. "This was your father's lightsaber," Ben said, his voice heavy with the weight of the statement. "This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age." Luke took it, his hands trembling. He had heard stories of the Jedi, of course. Ben had told him the tales, framed as legends of a fallen order of peacekeepers. He had never connected it directly to his father, whom he'd been told was a navigator on a spice freighter who had died long ago. "My father, he was a Jedi?" Luke asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ben's expression was pained. The lie was a necessary burden, a shield he had carried for years. "He was, Luke. He was a great pilot, a cunning warrior, and a good friend. He was betrayed and murdered by a young Jedi named Darth Vader, a pupil of mine who turned to evil. Vader helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights." The partial truth landed with the force of a physical blow. Luke looked down at the lightsaber, a relic of a murdered father he never knew, a father who was a part of this secret, magical world. The anger was there, a hot spark in his chest. Anger at this Vader, at the Empire, at the injustice of it all. He felt the pull of it, the seductive promise of power it offered. Ben sensed it immediately. He placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. Anger is a path to the dark side, Luke. Your father was seduced by it. You must learn to let your anger go. Acknowledge it, feel it, and then release it into the Force. It is a part of you, but it does not have to rule you. Luke closed his eyes, his knuckles white on the lightsaber hilt. He breathed, just as Ben had taught him 1,000 times. He felt the heat of his anger, a burning coal in his soul. He didn't fight it. He didn't suppress it. He observed it. He felt its edges, its weight. And then, slowly, he exhaled, and imagined it dissolving, becoming just another wave in the great ocean of the Force. The heat subsided. His grip loosened. He opened his eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching sadness. Teach me, he said, his voice clear and steady. Teach me how to use it. Teach me to be a Jedi. Like my father. Obi-Wan's heart ached, but he nodded. I will. The training became more formal, more intense. They constructed a training remote, and Luke spent hours in the remote canyons deflecting its stinging bolts, first with a shield, then with the lightsaber. He was a natural. His movements, honed by years of Force-based awareness exercises, were fluid and intuitive. He didn't just see the bolts, he felt them coming. But all secrets, on a planet as small and interconnected as Tatooine, eventually cast a shadow. Whispers of the strange hermit and his gifted protege began to circulate in the smoky cantinas of Mos Eisley and the dusty markets of Anchorhead. They were just whispers, dismissible as desert madness, but whispers travel. And the Empire had very good hearing. On Coruscant, in his spire of black obsidian, the Emperor felt a faint tremor in the Force. A loose thread in his perfect tapestry of darkness. It was faint, distant, but it was there. A Skywalker. It could not be. The boy was dead, the mother with him. And yet, the feeling persisted. He would not ignore it. He summoned one of his dark hunters, a tool of his will, an inquisitor. The ninth sister, a Dowatin of immense size and cruelty, was tasked with investigating a sector that included the outer rim world of Tatooine. Her official mission was to enforce Imperial tax law and hunt down rebel sympathizers. Her true mission was to follow the scent of the Force, to find its source, and to extinguish it. Or, if it was strong enough, to break it and bring it before her master. Her star destroyer, the Implacable, arrived in orbit around the desert planet, a dagger hanging in the sky. On the surface, life continued, but a new tension settled over the landscape. Stormtrooper patrols became more frequent, more aggressive. Checkpoints were established on the main routes. The Empire's grip was tightening. Ben felt the shift immediately. A coldness in the Force, a focused malevolence he had not felt since the darkest days of the Purge. There is a shadow over this world, Luke, he said one evening, as they watched the Star Destroyer glinting in the twilight sky. We must be more careful than ever. The Inquisitor began her work with brutal efficiency. She did not ask questions. She took. She would stride into a settlement, her red-bladed saber humming, and her purge troopers would round up the locals. She would reach out with the Force, sifting through their fear, their greed, their petty hatreds, looking for any scrap of information. She heard the whispers of a boy who could fix anything, a pilot who flew like a demon, a boy who spent time with the old hermit in the wastes. It was enough. The Inquisitor's shuttle descended towards the Lars homestead. Ben felt its approach like a spike of ice in his mind. He was miles away, in his hut, deep in meditation. His eyes snapped open. Luke, he whispered into the Force, a desperate, silent plea. Luke was in the garage, finishing repairs on a vaporator. He felt it too. A sudden, crushing wave of cold and fear. It wasn't his own. It was coming from the house, He heard his aunt scream. It was a short, sharp sound, cut off abruptly. He dropped his tools and ran. He burst into the courtyard to a scene from a nightmare. Two black-clad purge troopers stood over the crumpled forms of his aunt and uncle. And in the center of the courtyard stood a giant, a female Dowton with cold, dead eyes and a sneer on her face. In her hand, she held a spinning, double-bladed red lightsaber. "There you are," the ninth sister purred, her voice a low growl. "The little force flea. I could smell you from orbit," she gestured with her blade towards Owen and Beru. They were very protective. Very brave. Very foolish. Luke stared at their bodies. Time seemed to slow down. The sounds of the desert faded. The hum of the red lightsaber filled his entire world. The burning coal of anger he had learned to release was back, but this time it was not a coal. It was an inferno. A white-hot, eviscerating rage that consumed everything. His sadness, his fear, his training. All of it burned away, leaving only a single, screaming desire for vengeance. "You," he snarled, the word a guttural sound he didn't recognize as his own. "Yes, me," the Inquisitor said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. "Show me what the old man taught you, boy. Show me your hate." Luke didn't think. He didn't plan. He acted. He reached out with the Force, his hand trembling with rage, and his father's lightsaber, which he'd hidden in a compartment beneath the workbench, flew from the garage and into his hand. It ignited with a snap hiss, its blue blade a stark contrast to the bloody sunset and the crimson weapon of his enemy. He charged. It was not a duel. It was a frenzy. Luke attacked with a wild, desperate fury, his form sloppy, his strikes powered by pure, unadulterated rage. He was faster than he had ever been, stronger. He drove the ninth sister back with the sheer ferocity of his assault. She was surprised, even impressed. The boy had power. Raw, untamed, beautiful power. She parried his clumsy blows with ease, her spinning blade a red shield of energy. "Good," she hissed, her own strikes beginning to land, scoring burns on his arms and tunic. "Use your anger. It gives you focus. Makes you strong." Luke wasn't listening. He was lost in the red haze of his hatred. He could feel the dark side, a cold, intoxicating power, flooding into him, answering his call. It felt good. It felt right. He saw an opening and lunged, a move Ben would have called reckless and suicidal. The ninth sister simply sidestepped and kicked him hard in the chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. The wind was knocked out of him, his head ringing. She loomed over him, the tips of her spinning saber just inches from his face. "Pathetic," she spat. "You have the fire, but no control. Your master has failed you. He made you weak." As she raised her weapon for the final blow, a new sound cut through the air. A different snap hiss. A blade of brilliant, familiar blue ignited, blocking her downward strike with a shower of sparks. Obi-Wan Kenobi stood between the Inquisitor and Luke, his face a mask of grim determination. He had run faster than he had in years, his old legs burning, his heart pounding with terror. He was too late to save Owen and Beru. But he would not be too late to save Luke. "You," the ninth sister snarled, recognizing the face from faded Jedi Temple records. "Kenobi. The great General Kenobi. Hiding in a sandhole. How the mighty have fallen. Get up, Luke!" Obi-Wan commanded, not taking his eyes off the Inquisitor. He was locked in a blade lock, the strain showing on his face. The Dowton was immensely strong. "Clear your mind. Let go of your anger. It is a trap." Luke pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. His rage was still there, but the sight of his master, so calm and focused in the face of this monster, was like a splash of cold water. He saw the trap. He saw how his anger had been used against him, how it had blinded him and led him to ruin. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the lessons of a decade fighting for purchase against the tidal wave of his grief. The duel between Obi-Wan and the Ninth Sister was one of experience versus brute force. Obi-Wan, a master of the defensive Sarisu form, was a wall of blue light, deflecting and redirecting her powerful, aggressive strikes. He moved with an economy of motion, his age forcing him to conserve his energy, to rely on precision and wisdom rather than youthful stamina. "You've grown old, Kenobi," the Inquisitor taunted, pressing her attack. "The desert has withered you." "There are things that grow stronger with age," Obi-Wan replied, his blade a blur. "Patience is one of them." Luke watched, his blue blade held loosely in his hand. He could feel the ebb and flow of the fight in the Force. He saw his master's strategy. Obi-Wan wasn't trying to win. He was trying to survive. He was waiting for him. Clear your mind. Find the connection. Luke closed his eyes for a brief second. He let go of the burning image of his aunt and uncle. He let go of the hatred for the monster in front of him. He let go of his own failure. He opened himself to the Force, not as a weapon, but as an ally. The world came rushing back, but it was different now. Sharper. Clearer. He could feel Obi-Wan's fatigue. He could feel the Inquisitor's frustration, her growing impatience. He could feel the weak point in the floor of the courtyard, a section of Duracrete that had been damaged by a leaking vaporator years ago. The Ninth Sister, tiring of the old man's defensive dance, disengaged and hurled a loose Hydra spanner at him with the Force. Obi-Wan deflected it easily, but the move left her open for a fraction of a second. "Now, Luke!" Obi-Wan yelled. Luke didn't charge. He didn't swing. He raised his hand, focused his will, and slammed his metaphorical fist into the weak point in the Duracrete beneath the Inquisitor's feet. The ground buckled, cracking, and giving way. The Ninth Sister cried out in surprise as her leg plunged through the floor, throwing her off balance. It was the only opening they would get. Obi-Wan lunged, his blue blade flashing. But he was not aiming for a killing blow. He brought his saber down on the hilt of the Inquisitor's weapon, severing it in two. The red blades died with a fizzle. In the same motion, Luke surged forward, not with a strike, but with a powerful Force push, slamming the off-balance Dowerton against the wall of the homestead with enough force to crack the stone. She slumped to the ground, stunned and disarmed. Silence descended, broken only by the hum of two blue lightsabers and the harsh, ragged breathing of the combatants. Luke stood over the fallen Inquisitor, his blade pointed at her throat. The anger was gone, but a cold, hard resolve had taken its place. It would be so easy. An act of justice. An act of vengeance. "Luke, no." Obi-Wan's voice was gentle, but firm. He placed a hand on Luke's arm. "This is not our way. Victory is not about destruction. It is about preservation. We have won." Luke looked from the helpless Inquisitor to his master's weary, pleading eyes. He looked at the bodies of the only parents he had ever known. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He took a breath, and extinguished his blade. But the Ninth Sister was not defeated. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. "You are weak," she rasped. And with her free hand, she slammed a button on her wrist. "Come, my lord. I have found him. Skywalker. On Tatooine. The Lars homestead." A bolt of blue energy suddenly erupted from the sky. It wasn't a blaster bolt. It was a turbolaser, a pinpoint strike from the Star Destroyer in orbit. It struck the Inquisitor's shuttle, which was parked just outside the courtyard, engulfing it in a massive fireball. The Inquisitor's eyes went wide with shock and betrayal just before a second bolt struck the homestead itself. the world dissolved into fire and thunder. Obi-Wan grabbed Luke, pulling him back as the courtyard and the house he had grown up in were vaporized in a searing flash of green light. The shockwave threw them backwards, and darkness took them. The Empire was not interested in prisoners. It was interested in erasure. When Luke awoke, it was to the acrid smell of burning metal and ozone. The twin suns were gone, hidden behind a thick plume of black smoke that rose from a crater where his home used to be. Everything was gone. The house. The garage. His aunt and uncle. The Inquisitor. Wiped from existence. Obi-Wan was kneeling beside him, his hand on Luke's forehead. He was bruised and bleeding from a cut on his temple, but he was alive. "Luke," he said, his voice strained. "Are you all right?" Luke sat up, his body aching. He looked at the crater, at the smoldering ruin of his entire life. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. But the rage did not return. In its place was a hollow, empty calm. A terrible clarity. "She sent a signal," Luke said, his voice flat. "They know." "Yes," Obi-Wan said, his gaze turning to the sky where the Star Destroyer still hung like a vulture. "They know something is here. They don't know who survived. We cannot stay." Her message was our death sentence, but also our cover. The Empire will believe its problem on Tatooine has been solved. Luke got to his feet, his legs unsteady. He looked at the devastation one last time, searing the image into his memory. It was not a memory of anger. It was a memory of cost. The cost of the Empire. The cost of darkness. "Owen was right," Luke said, his voice cracking. "You did bring this to them." The words were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact. A shared burden. Obi-Wan's face, already etched with grief, seemed to crumble. "Yes, Luke," he whispered. "I did." He stood, his own sorrow a palpable aura. "And it is a debt I will spend the rest of my life repaying." He put a hand on Luke's shoulder. "There is nothing left for us here. The galaxy is much larger than this world. There is a rebellion fighting against the Empire. A princess from Alderaan sent a message, a plea for help. I intercepted it days ago. I had hoped we would have more time to prepare. To choose our path. But our path has been chosen for us." Luke looked away from the ruins of his past and towards the endless horizon. The future was no longer a distant dream of stars. It was a harsh, unavoidable reality. His childhood was over, burned away in a flash of turbolaser fire. All that was left was the man, or the boy trying to be one, and the Jedi Master who had been his guide. "Where do we go?" Luke asked. "We go to Mos Eisley," Obi-Wan said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old strength. "And we find passage. Our war, I am afraid, has just begun." The journey to Mos Eisley was a silent one. They traveled on foot through the night, sticking to rocky canyons and shadowed valleys, the plume of smoke from the homestead a constant, grim beacon behind them. Luke walked like a phantom, his grief a shroud that muffled the world. He didn't speak, didn't look at Obi-Wan. He just moved forward, one foot in front of the other, his father's lightsaber a heavy weight on his belt. Obi-Wan respected his silence. There were no words that could heal this wound, no Jedi platitude that could soothe the raw agony of such a loss. All he could offer was his presence, a steady, quiet companion in the darkness. He felt Luke's pain in the Force, a gaping, jagged hole. But beneath the pain, he also felt the core of strength he had spent 16 years building. The boy was not broken. He was forged. Mos Eisley was, as Obi-Wan had once famously noted, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. But it was also a place of transit, a place where one could disappear. The increased Imperial presence had put the city on edge. Stormtrooper patrols marched through the dusty streets with an arrogant swagger, and TIE fighters screamed overhead, a constant reminder of the Empire's authority. They sold Luke's battered landspeeder for a handful of credits, enough for passage, but not enough to be choosy. They needed a ship with no questions asked, a pilot who valued money over Imperial regulations. They needed a smuggler. The cantina was exactly as Obi-Wan remembered it, dark, loud, and smelling of stale booze and unwashed aliens. The music of the modal nodes did little to cut the tension in the air. Every eye seemed to follow them as they entered, a boy with the haunted look of a survivor and an old man in a dusty robe. Obi-Wan guided Luke to a secluded booth, his hand resting near the hilt of his lightsaber. His senses were on high alert, sifting through the cacophony of thoughts and emotions in the room, searching for the right combination of desperation and skill. He found it almost immediately. A cocky, arrogant presence, tinged with the anxiety of a man deep in debt. He was sitting with a Wookiee, trying to look casual. Before Obi-Wan could make his approach, trouble found them. Two thugs, a brutish Aqualish and his human friend whose face was a roadmap of bad life choices, cornered Luke while Obi-Wan was ordering drinks. "He doesn't like you," the human, Ponda Baba, slurred, gesturing to his companion, Dr. Evazan. "I'm sorry," Luke replied, his voice quiet, trying to step around them. He had no patience for this, no energy for a petty bar fight. "I don't like you either," Evazan snarled, getting in Luke's face. "You just watch yourself. We are wanted men. I have the death sentence on 12 systems." "I'll be careful," Luke said, his hand moving instinctively to his lightsaber. "You'll be dead," Evazan shouted, shoving Luke backward. It happened in a flash. But it wasn't Obi-Wan who intervened. As Evazan reached for his blaster, Luke's hand shot out. He didn't draw his weapon. He simply pushed. Not with his hand, but with the Force. Evazan and Ponda Baba were thrown back as if hit by a charging bantha, slamming into a table and sending drinks and patrons flying. The cantina fell silent. Everyone stared at the young man who hadn't seemed to move a muscle. Luke looked at his own hand, surprised by the ferocity of his own reaction. It wasn't anger. It was instinct. A pure, defensive reflex. Obi-Wan was at his side instantly, his lightsaber ignited. The blue blade cast an ethereal glow in the dim light. "This one's not worth the effort," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the now-cowed patrons. "We'll be on our way." He deactivated his blade and guided Luke away from the mess. As they passed the booth with the smuggler and the Wookiee, the man, Han Solo, let out a low whistle. "Nice trick, kid. A little loud for my taste, but effective." Obi-Wan stopped. "Are you the captain of the Millennium Falcon?" he asked, getting straight to the point. Han's eyes narrowed. "I am." "What's it to you, old man?" "My apprentice and I require urgent passage to the Alderaan system," Obi-Wan stated. Han laughed. "Alderaan? I'm not running any diplomatic missions, Gramps. Besides, with that new Star Destroyer in orbit, getting off-world is a little tricky right now." He leaned back, putting his boots up on the table. "And it'll cost you something special. We can pay you 2,000 credits now, plus 15,000 when we reach Alderaan," Luke said, stepping forward. The number was a bluff, a desperate gamble, but he said it with a confidence that surprised even himself. Grief had burned away his youthful uncertainty. Han's boots hit the floor. He looked from the serious-faced boy to the old Jedi. 17,000? That was more than enough to pay off Jabba the Hutt. 17? For a simple transport job? He looked at their robes, at the lightsaber on Luke's belt. "What kind of trouble are you in?" "The kind that's better left unknown," Obi-Wan said smoothly. "We are being pursued by the Empire. We need a ship that can outrun their patrols. We've been told yours is one of the fastest. Han's bravado wavered for a second. The Empire. This was more than just skipping out on a docking fee. But 17,000. He glanced at his Wookiee co-pilot, Chewbacca, who let out a low growl of consideration. All right, you're on, Han said, a greedy glint in his eye. But no funny business. I'm the captain, it's my ship. My rules. And if you bring a squadron of TIEs down on me, the deal is off. He stood up. Docking Bay 94. Be there. And be ready. The escape from Mos Eisley was a chaotic blur. They had barely settled into the Falcon's cockpit when a squad of stormtroopers stormed the docking bay, blaster bolts ricocheting off the ship's hull. Han cursed and slammed the controls, the ship lurching into the air with a groan of protesting metal. I thought you said they wouldn't be looking for you. Han yelled over the alarms as he weaved through the city's spires. Circumstances can change, Obi-Wan said calmly from the co-pilot's seat, his hands flying over the shield controls with a familiarity that surprised Han. Just get us out of the atmosphere. 2 Star Destroyers loomed in orbit, a seemingly impenetrable blockade. They're going to have us in a tractor beam before we can even make the jump. Han shouted. Angle us between them, Luke said from behind, his eyes closed. He was reaching out with the Force, feeling the patrol patterns of the TIE fighters, the energy fluctuations of the tractor beam projectors. There's a blind spot in their targeting arrays, just off the port bow of the command ship. Listen to a kid who's never been off-world? You're crazy. Han scoffed. The boy is strong with the Force, Obi-Wan said, his gaze fixed on the view screen. And I would trust his instincts over your scanners right now, Captain. Han hesitated for a second, then cursed again and banked the ship hard, following Luke's seemingly insane instructions. For a terrifying moment, they flew directly towards the massive Star Destroyer. Warning lights flashed. Proximity alerts screamed. Then, just as Luke had said, they slipped through a gap in the tractor beam coverage. Punch it! Luke yelled. Han slammed the levers for the hyperdrive, and the stars outside the cockpit stretched into long lines of brilliant white. The Falcon shuddered, and then they were gone, leaving Tatooine and its Imperial entanglements behind. The silence of hyperspace was a welcome relief. Han looked from his console to the boy standing behind him, then to the old man who was calmly resetting the shield modulators. These weren't simple passengers. He didn't know what they were, but he knew one thing for sure. This was not going to be a simple trip. In the main hold of the Falcon, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Luke sat at the Dejarik table, staring at the holographic monsters, but not seeing them. He was replaying the last 24 hours in his mind, the fire, the loss, the rage, the escape. It felt like a lifetime ago that he was just a farm boy fixing vaporators. Obi-Wan sat across from him, cleaning his lightsaber with a quiet focus. He could feel Luke's turmoil. The boy was processing his trauma, and it was crucial that he do so without letting the dark side take root. Grief is not weakness, Luke, Obi-Wan said softly, breaking the silence. It is a testament to the love you bore them. Owen and Beru were good people. They loved you. Do not dishonor their memory by letting their loss corrupt you. It was my fault, Luke said, his voice hollow. If I wasn't what I am, they would still be alive. The Inquisitor would have found you eventually, Obi-Wan countered gently. Your power is a beacon, Luke. Hiding it forever was never an option. The only choice we ever have is how we choose to use the gifts we are given. Your aunt and uncle gave you a childhood. A home. They gave you the gift of a compassionate heart. That is the foundation upon which everything else must be built. He looked at Luke, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient sadness. The guilt you feel. I know it well. I feel it every day for your father. But we cannot let it define us. We can only let it guide us. We must be better. Luke looked up, meeting his master's gaze. He saw the truth in his words, the shared pain. He wasn't alone in his grief. He nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between them. Their journey was cut short. As they dropped out of hyperspace in the Alderaan system, they were met not with the familiar blue-green jewel of a planet, but with a field of asteroids and debris. Alderaan was gone. What happened? Han breathed, his cocky demeanor gone, replaced by sheer disbelief. Obi-Wan stood up, his face pale. He stumbled, a hand going to his head. I felt it, he whispered, his voice filled with horror. A great disturbance in the Force. As if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. Luke felt it too, a lingering echo of pain and death that made his stomach churn. In the distance, a small, moon-like object hung in space. A battle station. That's no moon, Obi-Wan said, his voice grim. Before they could react, the Falcon was caught, snagged by a tractor beam that pulled them inexorably towards the massive station. Towards the Death Star. Towards Darth Vader. The war had found them again, and this time, there was no running. The Millennium Falcon was pulled into the cavernous hangar bay of the Death Star with a final, metallic groan. Imperial officers and stormtroopers swarmed the docking area, their white armor a stark, sterile contrast to the grimy freighter. Han and Chewbacca, their faces grim, quickly hid their passengers in the ship's smuggling compartments. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort. If they find you, we are all dead, Han whispered, sealing the floor panel. Just stay quiet. Luke and Obi-Wan found themselves in the cramped, dark space, the hum of the station's systems a low, oppressive thrum. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the cold, clinical presence of the dark side. Vader is here, Obi-Wan said, his voice a low whisper. His eyes were closed, his face a mask of concentration. I feel his presence. It is a presence I have not felt since. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The memory of Mustafar hung between them, thick and suffocating. Luke felt it too. A nexus of power, of cold, calculated hatred that made the Inquisitor's presence on Tatooine feel like a pale imitation. This was the source. This was the man who had murdered his father. The embers of his anger, which he had so carefully banked, threatened to glow hot once more. He forced them down, remembering Obi-Wan's words. Be better. What do we do? Luke asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his lightsaber. The tractor beam must be disabled if we are to escape, Obi-Wan reasoned, his mind already working through the tactical problem. It will be controlled from a power terminal somewhere on this station. But there is another priority. The message I intercepted, the one from the princess. She is likely a prisoner here. The plans she was carrying, the ones for this battle station, are the rebellion's only hope. Their mission had shifted. It was no longer about escape. It was about rescue and recovery. A new sense of purpose cut through Luke's grief. His aunt and uncle were gone. Alderaan was gone. All that was left was the fight. We have to find her, Luke said, his voice firm. Obi-Wan looked at his apprentice in the dim light. He saw the boy he had raised, but he also saw the man he was becoming. Focused. Determined. This will be incredibly dangerous, Luke. The risks are astronomical. The risk of doing nothing is greater, Luke replied, echoing a sentiment Obi-Wan himself had expressed many times. A smile touched Obi-Wan's lips, a brief flicker of pride in the darkness. You are learning, my young apprentice. After the Imperial scanning crew declared the ship clean and departed, Han and Chewie released them. Han was frantic. We've got to get out of here. This whole station is crawling with troopers. We are not leaving, Luke stated flatly. What do you mean, we are not leaving? Han sputtered. Did you not see the size of that thing? They catch us, we are space dust. We have a new destination, Obi-Wan said, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Han's panic. We need to find the detention block. AA-23. And we need to disable the tractor beam. The controls should be on a command tower overlooking this hangar. Han stared at them as if they had grown second heads. The detention block? Are you insane? And who is this we? I'm a smuggler, not a soldier. I'm not getting myself killed for some princess and her rebellion. She's rich, Luke said, an idea sparking in his mind. He was beginning to understand how to motivate the cynical pilot. Han paused. Rich. Rich, powerful. If you were to rescue her, the reward would be. Luke trailed off, letting Han's imagination fill in the blank. How rich? Han asked, his greed warring with his survival instinct. More wealth than you can imagine, Obi-Wan added, playing along. He did not approve of the deception, but needs must. Han groaned, running a hand through his hair. I'm going to regret this. I know it. The plan was audacious. Obi-Wan would go alone to disable the tractor beam, using his Jedi abilities to move unseen through the station. Luke, Han, and Chewbacca, disguised in stolen stormtrooper armor, would infiltrate the detention block and rescue the princess. The Force will be with you, Luke, Obi-Wan said, placing a hand on his apprentice's shoulder before they parted ways. It was not a farewell. It was a statement of fact. A reminder of the connection that bound them. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. But do not let your feelings cloud your judgment. Vader will be looking for you. I'll be careful, Luke promised. As Obi-Wan disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of the Death Star, a ghost moving through the machine, Luke donned the ill-fitting stormtrooper helmet. The world became a narrow field of view, the sound of his own breathing loud in his ears. He was no longer a farm boy. He was a soldier. A Jedi on his first real mission. The infiltration of the detention block was a comedy of errors and near disasters, held together by sheer luck and Chewbacca's intimidating presence. Han's blustering attempts to impersonate an officer were almost their undoing, but Luke's quiet calm and occasional, subtle use of the Force to nudge the minds of suspicious officers saw them through. They found her in cell 2187. Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan was not the damsel in distress they had expected. When Luke opened the cell door, she stood there, defiant and proud, even in the face of her planet's destruction. Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Luke, flustered, took off his helmet. I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here with Ben Kenobi to rescue you. Leia's eyes widened in recognition at the name Kenobi. Hope, a dangerous and almost forgotten emotion, flickered within her. Ben Kenobi? Where is he? He's disabling the tractor beam, Han said, growing impatient. Now let's go. The guards will be here any second. Their escape was even more chaotic than their entry. Alarms blared. An entire squadron of stormtroopers descended on their position, pinning them down in a hail of blaster fire. Some rescue. Leia yelled over the explosions. You came in here, but you didn't have a plan for getting out. He's the brains, sweetheart. Han shouted, gesturing at Luke. Luke ignored them, closing his eyes for a moment, trying to find a path, a connection. He saw a garbage chute, a risky but direct way out of the firefight. This way, he yelled, blasting the control panel and diving into the refuse. They landed in a heap in the station's garbage masher, the walls of which immediately began to grind inwards. The stench was overwhelming, the situation dire. As the walls closed in, and a Dianoga dragged Luke under the filthy water, it was only a last-minute communication with the droids R2-D2 and C-3PO, whom they had brought with them from the Falcon, that saved them. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan moved through the Death Star like a whisper. He used the Force not to fight, but to avoid. He bent light and sound around him, becoming a ripple in the perception of the troopers he passed. He was a ghost in the machine, his mind focused on a single goal. But as he reached the chasm housing the tractor beam controls, he felt a sudden, intense chill. A presence he had been dreading and expecting. Darth Vader stood on the far side of the walkway, his black armor seeming to drink the light from the corridor. His respirator echoed in the silence, a rhythmic, mechanical sound that was a perversion of life. "I have been waiting for you, Obi-Wan," Vader's voice boomed, a sin-sized mockery of a voice Kenobi once knew. "We meet again, at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner, now, I am the master." Obi-Wan ignited his lightsaber, its blue blade a defiant spark of light against the oppressive darkness of the Sith Lord. Only a master of evil, Darth. He knew this was a fight he might not win. Vader was younger, stronger, his body augmented by mechanics, his connection to the dark side absolute. Obi-Wan was old. His strength was in his wisdom, his patience. But he also knew this fight was a necessity. He had to keep Vader occupied. He had to buy Luke time to escape. The duel was not the acrobatic spectacle of their youth on Mustafar. It was a grim, calculated affair. The brutal, hammering blows of Vader's gem-so style were met by the impenetrable defense of Obi-Wan's Surisu. It was a battle of unstoppable force versus immovable object. Sparks flew as their blades crashed together again and again, the humming of their lightsabers a song of hatred and regret. Vader was relentless, his rage a tangible thing that pressed down on Obi-Wan, seeking to crush his spirit as well as his body. "Your powers are weak, old man," Vader taunted, forcing Obi-Wan back step by step. "You can't win, Darth," Obi-Wan replied, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He parried a vicious overhead strike that would have shattered a lesser defense. "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." He was not just speaking of his own potential to become one with the Force. He was speaking of Luke. He was speaking of the legacy that would live on, the hope that Vader could never extinguish. As they fought, Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewbacca, having escaped the garbage masher, were racing back to the hangar bay. They rounded a corner and saw the duel. Luke stopped dead, his blood running cold. His master. His friend. Dueling the monster who had killed his father. "Ben!" Luke cried out. Obi-Wan heard him. He glanced over, and for a fraction of a second, his focus was broken. He saw Luke, he saw Leia, he saw the future of the rebellion, the future of the Jedi, about to escape. His purpose was fulfilled. He had bought them the time they needed. Vader seized the opportunity. His red blade swung in a deadly arc. But Obi-Wan was ready. In that final moment, he did something unexpected. He did not raise his blade to block. He did not try to dodge. He closed his eyes, a look of serene peace on his face, and simply let go. He became one with the Force, his body vanishing an instant before Vader's blade passed through the space where he had been. The brown robe collapsed into an empty pile on the floor. Luke screamed, a raw, anguished cry of loss. "No!" The stormtroopers opened fire. Han grabbed Luke, dragging him towards the Falcon. "Come on. There's nothing you can do." Luke fired his blaster blindly at the troopers, his mind reeling. Ben was gone. Just gone. He stumbled up the ramp of the Falcon, the blaster fire ricocheting around them. He turned for one last look. He saw Vader standing there, prodding the empty robe with his foot, a figure of confusion and triumph. The image was burned into his mind as the ramp closed, sealing him in with his fresh, new grief. The galaxy had taken everything from him. His home, his family, and now, his master. The flight from the Death Star was frantic. TIE fighters swarmed the Millennium Falcon, their green lasers streaking past the cockpit viewports. Han wrestled with the controls, Chewbacca roaring beside him, while Luke, numb with shock, manned one of the quad laser cannons. He didn't fire with precision or strategy. He fired with rage. Each fighter he blasted into a cloud of shrapnel was a small, hollow victory against the overwhelming grief that consumed him. Ben was gone. The man who had been his guide, his mentor, his only link to a larger world, had vanished before his eyes. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe, harder to think. "We've got a problem." Han yelled over the comm, "They're letting us go. It's too easy." Leia, her face grim, understood immediately. "They're tracking us. They want to find the rebel base." Despite the danger, they had no choice. They had to deliver the Death Star plans. They made the jump to hyperspace, the relative quiet of the ship doing nothing to soothe Luke's raw nerves. He slumped into a chair in the main hold, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind only a vast, empty ache. Leia found him there, his head in his hands. She had lost her planet, her family, her entire world. She understood his pain in a way no one else on that ship could. She sat down beside him, her presence a quiet offering of solidarity. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I knew him when I was a girl. He served my father during the Clone Wars. He was a great man." "He was my friend," Luke whispered, his voice cracking. "He was all I had left." "We don't have time to grieve," Leia said, her voice gentle but firm, the voice of a leader. "The Empire is coming. What he did so we could survive, so we could fight back. We can't let his sacrifice be for nothing." Her words cut through the fog of his sorrow. She was right. Ben had given his life for this mission. For her. For the rebellion. To wallow in his own pain was to dishonor that sacrifice. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear, and saw not just a princess, but a warrior. He nodded. "What's the plan?" They arrived at the fourth moon of Yavin, a lush jungle world that concealed the main base of the Rebel Alliance. The Millennium Falcon landed in the ancient Misasi Temple, a relic of a long-dead civilization, now repurposed for a desperate war. The welcome was muted, the news of Alderaan's destruction and the approaching Death Star casting a pall of dread over the entire base. The data from R2-D2 was analyzed with frantic urgency. The technical readouts of the Death Star revealed a single, critical weakness, a small thermal exhaust port, just 2 meters wide. A direct hit would trigger a chain reaction, destroying the station. It was a 1 in a million shot. The Rebel command staff gathered in the war room, a cavernous chamber filled with holographic displays and anxious faces. General Dodonna laid out the plan: a squadron of small, single-pilot fighters, X-Wings and Y-Wings, would attempt a trench run, braving the station's heavy turbolasers and TIE fighter patrols to deliver a proton torpedo into the port. It was a suicide mission. Luke, standing amongst the veteran pilots of red and gold squadrons, listened intently. He was just a farm boy from a backwater planet. He had only ever flown a skyhopper. But he was also the son of a Jedi Knight and the apprentice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he was one of the best pilots they had. "I want to fly," he said to the squadron leader, Garvin Dryce. Dryce looked him over, skepticism in his eyes. "You've never flown an X-Wing, kid." "I can fly anything," Luke said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised even him. It wasn't arrogance. It was a simple statement of fact, a deep, instinctual knowledge that flowed from the Force. Before Dryce could argue, a voice spoke from the back of the room. "Let the boy fly. He's the best we've got." It was Han Solo. He was leaning against the doorway, his arms crossed. He had gotten his reward, a ship full of credits, and was planning to leave. But something had kept him here. Something about the kid, the princess, this hopeless, desperate cause. So Luke Skywalker, farm boy from Tatooine, became Red 5. As he climbed into the cockpit of his X-Wing, the familiar scent of ozone and charged machinery a strange comfort, he felt a profound sense of loneliness. Ben was gone. He was truly on his own. He strapped himself in, R2-D2 whistling nervously from the droid socket behind him. He ran through the pre-flight checks, his hands moving with an innate familiarity. Then, he felt it. A flicker. A warmth in the Force. A familiar presence. Luke. The voice was not in his ears. It was in his mind, in his very soul. It was Ben. Luke's breath hitched. Ben, he whispered, his eyes wide. I am with you, Luke, the voice echoed, calm and reassuring. Trust your feelings. The Force will be with you. Always. Obi-Wan's final words on the Death Star had not been a metaphor. He had become one with the Force, a part of the cosmic energy that bound the galaxy together. He was not a ghost. He was more. He was everywhere. And he was here, now, with his apprentice. A wave of relief and renewed strength washed over Luke. He was not alone. His master was still with him, a guide from beyond the veil of death. He took a deep breath, his hands steady on the controls. He was ready. The Battle of Yavin was a maelstrom of light and fire. The small rebel fighters were gnats swarming a leviathan. Laser fire, green and red, filled the void. Explosions blossomed in the darkness as ships on both sides were torn apart. Luke flew with a supernatural grace, his X-Wing an extension of his will. He weaved through turbo-laser fire, blasted TIE fighters from the sky, his movements guided by a combination of his own innate skill and the gentle nudges of Obi-Wan's spirit in the Force. Stay on target, the other pilots' voices crackled over the comm. Luke, trust your feelings, Ben's voice whispered in his mind. The first trench run failed. The second failed. The casualties were mounting. Red leader, gold leader, gone. The Death Star was moving into range of the moon. They were running out of time. I'm going in, Luke said, his voice steady. He peeled off from the main group and dove into the narrow trench, 2 wingmen, Biggs and Wedge, flanking him. The trench was a blur of grey metal and flashing lights. Turbolasers tracked them, the explosions rocking his ship. This is it, he muttered, his eyes fixed on the targeting computer. Then, a new threat appeared behind them. A custom TIE fighter, its bent wings a sinister silhouette against the light of the trench. I'm on the leader, a cold, synthesized voice crackled over the open channel. It was Vader. Vader was a demon in the trench, his skill in the cockpit matched only by his mastery of the Force. He picked off Luke's wingmen with terrifying precision. Biggs's X-Wing exploded in a fireball. Wedge was damaged, forced to pull out. I can't hold them. Wedge yelled as he broke away. Luke was alone. Alone with the man who had murdered his father and his master. The exhaust port was just ahead. The targeting computer beeped, struggling to lock on. Use the Force, Luke, Ben's voice urged, stronger now. Let go, Luke. Let go? His targeting computer was his only hope. To turn it off was madness. Luke, trust me, Ben insisted. Vader was closing in, his targeting lock almost complete. The Force is strong with this one, Vader murmured to himself, sensing the conflict in the young pilot. Luke took a breath. He thought of his master's sacrifice. He thought of his calm, serene face in those final moments. He reached out and switched off the targeting computer. The display went blank. The familiar beep was gone. He was flying blind, with only his feelings, his instincts, and the voice of his ghostly mentor to guide him. The world seemed to slow down. He could feel the station around him, the flow of energy, the precise location of the tiny port. He could feel Vader behind him, a cold knot of hatred preparing to fire. "I have you now," Vader said, his thumb pressing the firing button. Suddenly, a barrage of red laser fire slammed into Vader's ship. One of his wingmen exploded. The other peeled off in a panic. "Yahoo!" a familiar voice shouted over the comm, "You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home." It was Han. He had come back. The Millennium Falcon soared over the trench, its quad lasers blazing. Han's last volley struck Vader as TIE advanced, sending it spinning out of control, careening out of the trench and into the blackness of space. The path was clear. "Now, Luke!" Ben's voice commanded. Luke's thumb pressed the button. A pair of proton torpedoes shot from his X-wing, streaking down the trench. They seemed to move in slow motion, two tiny sparks of hope against the overwhelming grey of the station. They flew straight and true, disappearing into the exhaust port. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flash of light deep within the trench. A chain reaction of explosions rippled across the surface of the Death Star. A blinding white light erupted from its core, and the monstrous battle station disintegrated, blossoming into a silent, beautiful star of its own. Luke pulled his X-wing up and away from the expanding fireball, a jubilant yell escaping his lips. He had done it. They had done it. Back on Yavin 4, the command center erupted in cheers. Leia, watching the display, allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. Han's whoop of victory echoed over the comm system. As Luke flew back towards the jungle moon, the hero of the hour, he heard Ben's voice one last time, a gentle whisper on the edge of his consciousness. "The Force will be with you. Always." Luke Skywalker was no longer just a farm boy. He was a hero of the rebellion. He was the apprentice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And his journey had only just begun. The celebration in the Great Hall of the Massassi Temple was a moment of pure, unbridled joy in a galaxy that had known too much sorrow. The remnants of the fighter squadrons, the ground crews, the command staff, all gathered to honor the heroes who had snatched victory from the jaws of annihilation. Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Chewbacca walked down the central aisle to a thunderous applause, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and dawning pride. Princess Leia placed medals around Han's and Luke's necks. She gave Han a warm, grateful smile that held a hint of something more. But when she turned to Luke, her expression was different. It was one of shared loss and profound respect. They had both lost everything, and yet they stood here, symbols of a new hope. Their bond was not one of budding romance, but of deep, forged in fire camaraderie. Luke accepted the medal, but his mind was elsewhere. Amid the cheering and the celebration, he felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over him. He was a hero, yes, but he was also something more. He was the last student of a fallen Jedi Master, the inheritor of a legacy he was only beginning to understand. The destruction of the Death Star was not an end. It was a beginning. In the days that followed, the Rebel Alliance, flush with its impossible victory, began to regroup and plan its next move. The Empire was wounded, but far from defeated. The Emperor's fury would be terrible, and Darth Vader was still out there, a vengeful phantom nursing his defeat. Luke found himself at a crossroads. He was a symbol of the rebellion, a pilot of legendary skill. But his true path lay elsewhere. He spent hours in the quiet corners of the temple, meditating, reaching out with the Force, trying to reconnect with the spirit of his master. The connection was faint now, the voice no longer a clear guide in his mind, but a gentle presence, a feeling of peace and encouragement. He knew that Obi-Wan had shown him the way, but now he had to walk it himself. His training was woefully incomplete. He could feel the vastness of the Force, and his own knowledge was but a single drop in an endless ocean. One evening, as he sat staring into the jungle canopy, Leia joined him. You're troubled, she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Her own Force sensitivity, though untrained and unrecognized, allowed her to sense the currents of his emotion. I don't know what to do next, Luke admitted. Ben taught me so much, but there's still everything else. I feel like I'm standing at the shore of an ocean, and he only taught me how to get my feet wet. The rebellion needs you, Luke, Leia said. You're a leader. An inspiration. I'm a pilot, Luke corrected gently. And maybe something more. But I'm not ready. Not yet. Ben mentioned someone else. His own master, who survived the purge. He said that if anything happened to him, I should seek him out. Another Jedi? Leia's eyes widened. Where? He never told me, Luke said, a note of frustration in his voice. He only said I would find him when I was ready. He looked at his hands. I don't feel ready. The war did not wait for Luke to find his path. The Empire, enraged by its defeat, launched a campaign of retribution across the galaxy. The rebel fleet was forced to scatter, to hide, to engage in a series of hit-and-run attacks. For the next 3 years, Luke served the rebellion with distinction. He became Commander Skywalker, leading Rogue Squadron in countless battles against the Imperial war machine. He grew into his command, his Force abilities giving him an uncanny edge in strategy and combat. He could anticipate enemy movements, feel the weak points in their formations, and inspire loyalty and courage in the pilots who flew with him. He was a beacon of hope in the darkness, but inside, he felt a growing emptiness. His connection to the Force was a powerful tool, but he lacked the wisdom to truly understand it. The anger he had felt on Tatooine was a constant shadow at the edge of his consciousness, a beast he had to perpetually keep at bay. The rebellion eventually established a new hidden base on the frozen ice planet of Hoth. It was a bleak, unforgiving world, but it was remote and shielded from Imperial sensors. It was here, during a routine patrol of the frozen wastes, that fate intervened. Luke was investigating a suspected meteor crash when his snowspeeder was damaged. Stranded in the blizzard, he was attacked by a wampa, a massive ice creature. He was knocked unconscious and dragged back to its lair. He awoke hanging upside down, his feet frozen to the ceiling of the ice cave. The wampa was nearby, devouring the carcass of his tauntaun. His lightsaber lay on the floor, just out of reach. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through him. He was going to die here, alone in the ice. He closed his eyes, his training taking over. Quiet your mind. Feel the connection. He reached out with the Force, his fingers tingling. The lightsaber on the floor trembled. He focused, pouring all of his will, all of his desperation into that single act. The saber jumped into his hand. He ignited its blue blade, sliced himself free, and with a single, swift stroke, severed the wampa's arm before scrambling out of the cave and into the raging blizzard. He collapsed in the snow, his body succumbing to the hypothermia. As his vision faded, the world turning white, he saw a shimmering figure in the snow. It was Obi-Wan, his form clearer and more solid than it had been since the Battle of Yavin. Luke, the spirit said, his voice urgent. You must go to the Dagobah system. Dagobah? Luke mumbled, his lips numb. There you will learn from Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed me, Obi-Wan's spirit commanded. Luke, you must. His form flickered and faded as Luke finally succumbed to the cold, his last conscious thought a single word, Yoda. He was rescued by Han Solo, who had braved the deadly Hoth night to find him. But the words of his master's spirit were burned into his mind. Dagobah. Yoda. This was the path he had been waiting for. His revelation was soon overshadowed by a greater crisis. An Imperial probe droid had discovered the base. The Empire knew they were here. An Imperial fleet, led by Darth Vader's personal superstar destroyer, the Executor, dropped out of hyperspace, and the Battle of Hoth began. The evacuation was a desperate, chaotic scramble. The massive Imperial AT-AT walkers strode across the ice fields, their heavy cannons blasting the rebel defenses to pieces. Luke, now leading Rogue Squadron in their snowspeeders, flew brilliantly, coordinating the attack that brought down one of the walkers with tow cables. But it was a losing battle. They were outmatched and outgunned. As the last transport ships fled the planet, Luke knew he could not go with them. The fleet was scattering to a rendezvous point. But his path lay elsewhere. He told R2-D2 his destination, and as the battle raged around him, he lifted his X-Wing from the smoking ruins of Echo Base and made a blind jump into hyperspace, setting a course for a forgotten, swampy world in a remote sector of the galaxy. He was putting his faith in the words of a ghost, chasing a final hope for the future of the Jedi. The journey to Dagobah was one of quiet contemplation. As the stars streaked past the cockpit, Luke felt a mixture of trepidation and hope. He was leaving his friends, the rebellion, everything he had known for the past 3 years, to chase a phantom from his master's past. Was this recklessness? Or was it destiny? The ship emerged from hyperspace into a system with a single, unremarkable sun. The planet Dagobah was a swirling mass of green and brown, shrouded in thick clouds. His ship's sensors went haywire as he entered the atmosphere, the planet's strange energy field interfering with his electronics. He lost control, his X-Wing spiraling down into the dense, foggy swamp. He crashed in a murky bog, the ship sinking into the brackish water. He and R2 managed to get clear, but his ship was submerged, his only way off this world seemingly lost. The swamp was a living, breathing entity, a cacophony of strange sounds, the air thick with humidity and the smell of decay and life. The force was here, so strong and overwhelming it was like trying to breathe underwater. It was wild, ancient, and teeming with life. He set up a small camp, trying to make sense of his surroundings. He was lost, stranded, and completely alone. Doubt began to creep in. Had he imagined Obi-Wan's spirit? Had he thrown away his life on a hallucination brought on by the cold? It was then that he was found. A small, green creature with large, pointed ears and ancient, knowing eyes hobbled out of the mist, poking at his supplies with a jimmer stick. The creature was mischievous, speaking in a strange, backward syntax, and seemed more interested in stealing his lamp and his food than in helping him. "Away, put your weapon! I mean you no harm," the creature cackled as Luke drew his blaster. "Looking for someone?" "I'm looking for a great warrior," Luke said, his patience wearing thin. "Oh. Great warrior," the creature chuckled, shaking his head. "Wars not make one great," he poked Luke with his stick. "I can take you to him. But first, we eat. Good food. Come." Luke, having no other options, reluctantly followed the strange little being to a small, mud and thatch hut nestled in the roots of a giant tree. The creature, who called himself Yoda, was eccentric and seemingly senile, driving Luke to the brink of frustration. He questioned everything, tested Luke's patience, and seemed to find the whole situation amusing. "I'm wasting my time," Luke finally snapped, after a frustrating meal and a series of nonsensical questions. "I need to find Yoda." The little creature's demeanor suddenly changed. The mischievous glint in his eye was replaced by a deep, profound seriousness. His voice dropped, losing its playful tone. "I am Yoda," he said. And in that moment, Luke felt the immense power that radiated from him, a power so vast and deep it made the entire swamp seem like a quiet pond. This was the Jedi Master. "I am ready for the training," Luke said, humbled. Yoda shook his head sadly. "Ready are you? What know you of ready? For 800 years have I trained Jedi. My own counsel will I keep on who is to be trained." He looked at Luke, his gaze piercing, seeming to see every flaw, every doubt. A Jedi must have the deepest commitment, the most serious mind. This one, a long time have I watched. All his life has he looked away, to the future, to the horizon. Never his mind on where he was. What he was doing. Suddenly, a shimmering blue light filled the small hut. Obi-Wan's spirit stood beside Yoda, a spectral figure of calm reassurance. Obi-Wan, Yoda grumbled. Unexpected, this is. I told you he would come, Master, Obi-Wan's spirit said. He is our last hope. No, Yoda sighed. There is another. Luke watched, stunned, as his former master and the ancient Grand Master of the Jedi Order debated his fate. Yoda saw too much of Anakin in him. The impatience. The anger he kept buried deep inside. He was too old, too reckless. He will learn patience, Obi-Wan insisted. He has been a commander, a leader. He has learned responsibility. Will he? Yoda countered, turning his gaze back to Luke. He is not ready. I am ready. Luke protested. Ben, I can be a Jedi. Tell him I'm ready. Yoda looked from the desperate boy to the pleading spirit of his old friend. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Anakin is strong with him. A dangerous path he is on, but he saw the hope in Obi-Wan's ethereal eyes, the determination in Luke's. The galaxy was on the brink. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Ready, you think you are? We will see, Yoda finally relented. We will see. The training was more grueling than anything Luke could have imagined. It was a complete deconstruction of everything he thought he knew. Yoda pushed him physically, forcing him to run through the swamp with the small master on his back, to practice acrobatics and lightsaber forms until his muscles screamed. But the physical tests were secondary. The true training was mental. Yoda taught him to move objects with his mind, not with effort, but with belief. Do. Or do not. There is no try, he would say, as Luke struggled and failed to lift his sunken X-wing from the bog. He taught Luke to see the future, the past, the present, to feel the Force not as a tool, but as life itself. Luminous beings are we, Yoda explained, not this crude matter. The most difficult test came when Yoda sent him to a dark, twisted cave beneath a gnarled tree. What is in there? Luke asked, strapping on his weapons. Only what you take with you, Yoda replied grimly. Inside the cave, the air was cold, the dark side a palpable presence. He was confronted by a vision of Darth Vader. He ignited his lightsaber and charged, just as he had against the Inquisitor on Tatooine. He fought with a desperate ferocity, and in a single, swift move, decapitated the spectre. The helmet of the Dark Lord rolled on the ground, and the faceplate exploded, revealing not the face of a monster, but his own. Luke Skywalker stared back at himself from within the black helmet. He returned to Yoda, shaken. He had failed the test. He had taken his anger, his fear, his weapons into the cave, and it had shown him his own potential for darkness. He understood now. The enemy was not just Vader or the Emperor. The enemy was within. As his training progressed, his connection to the Force deepened. He began to have visions. Quick, fleeting glimpses of his friends in danger. He saw Han and Leia in a beautiful city in the clouds, walking into a trap. He saw them in pain, tortured. They are my friends, Luke said to Yoda and the spirit of Obi-Wan, his voice tight with anxiety. I have to help them. It is the future you see, Yoda warned. Difficult to see. Always in motion is the future. You must not go, Obi-Wan's spirit insisted. Luke, do not give in to your feelings. They will be used against you. But Han and Leia will die. Luke protested. If you go now, you will face Vader, Obi-Wan stated. You are not ready for the burden. You do not yet have control of your power. You will be destroyed. I can't just let them die. Luke's voice was an anguished cry. He was being torn in two. His duty to his friends versus his duty to his training, to the future of the Jedi. It was the same conflict of attachment that had destroyed his father. If you choose to face Vader, you will do it alone, Yoda said gravely. I cannot interfere. Luke looked at his mentors, one living, one dead, and saw the fear in their eyes. Fear for him. But the images of his friends in agony were too strong. He could not abandon them. It was not in his nature. I have to go, he said, his decision made. He turned away from them, his heart heavy. I'll return. I promise. I'll finish the training. He walked away, leaving Yoda and Obi-Wan behind. Told you, I did, Yoda sighed. Reckless, he is. Now, matters are worse. That boy is our last hope, Obi-Wan said, his spectral form filled with a sorrowful resignation. No, Yoda repeated, his gaze distant. There is another Skywalker. Luke used the Force to raise his X-Wing from the swamp, an act of sheer will and desperation that he had failed at so many times before. He didn't know how he did it. He just knew he had to. He climbed into the cockpit, his mind set, and blasted off from the swamp world, leaving his training, and a part of his innocence, behind. He was flying into a trap, he knew, but it was a trap he had to spring. He would not let his friends suffer. He would not make the same mistakes of detachment that the Jedi of old had made. Even if it killed him. Cloud City on the gas giant Bespin was a breathtaking sight, a metropolis of pristine white towers and elegant plazas floating in an endless sunset. But as Luke Skywalker landed his X-Wing on a designated platform, he felt no sense of wonder. The Force screamed a warning, a symphony of pain, fear, and betrayal. The beautiful city was a mask, hiding a dark and terrible secret. He was met by Lando Calrissian, the Baron Administrator of the city and an old friend of Han's. Lando's welcome was strained, his eyes filled with a guilt he could not hide. We've had some trouble here, Lando said, leading Luke through the eerily empty corridors. The Empire. They arrived just before you did. Luke's visions had been true. He had walked right into the heart of the trap. Lando led him to a formal dining room. The doors slid open, and Luke's blood ran cold. There, at the head of the table, stood Darth Vader. To the side, frozen in a block of carbonite, was the contorted form of Han Solo. Leia and Chewbacca were being held by stormtroopers, their faces etched with despair. The Force is with you, young Skywalker, Vader's voice boomed, chillingly calm. But you are not a Jedi yet. The rage that Luke had fought so hard to control on Dagobah surged forth. He ignited his lightsaber, the blue blade a stark contrast to the opulent room. You'll pay for this, he snarled, his training forgotten in a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. He lunged, but Vader was ready. The Dark Lord met his charge with a casual, one-handed block, his red blade easily turning aside Luke's frenzied attack. The duel began, a desperate, one-sided battle that moved from the dining room into the industrial heart of the city. Vader was toying with him. He was a predator playing with his food. He led Luke through the facility, to the central carbon freezing chamber. It was a place of extreme cold, of steam, and of shadows. Vader used the environment to his advantage, hurling objects at Luke with the Force, using the steam to disorient him. Luke fought with the passion and fire of his youth, but it was not enough. Vader was stronger, more experienced, his mastery of the Force a crushing weight. He drove Luke back, his powerful strikes forcing Luke onto the defensive. You have learned much, young one, Vader said, his blade locking with Luke's. The Jedi's teaching has served you well. You'll find I'm full of surprises, Luke grunted, breaking the lock and trying a desperate acrobatic maneuver he had learned from Yoda. Vader was unimpressed. He anticipated the move, catching Luke with a powerful force push that sent him tumbling into the freezing chamber. Vader activated the machine, intending to encase Luke in carbonite as he had Han. But Luke, using his burgeoning power, leaped from the chamber just as the freezing process began, escaping the fate of his friend. The duel continued onto a narrow gantry suspended over a vast, dark reactor shaft. Here, there was no room for acrobatics, no objects to throw. It was a pure contest of blades. And Luke was losing. Vader pressed his attack, his blows becoming heavier, more brutal. He was no longer toying with him. He was trying to break him. He beat down Luke's defenses, his red blade singing through the air. With a final, vicious strike, he severed Luke's right hand. The pain was excruciating, a searing, white-hot agony that eclipsed everything else. Luke screamed, stumbling back, clutching the smoking stump of his arm. His lightsaber, the weapon of his father, tumbled down into the abyss. He was disarmed. Defeated. Broken. He crawled to the end of the gantry, hanging precariously over the endless drop. Vader approached slowly, his black form a terrifying specter of absolute victory. "There is no escape," Vader said, his voice devoid of triumph, holding only a grim finality. "Don't make me destroy you." Luke looked from the abyss below to the monster before him. Death was preferable to capture. "You do not yet realize your importance," Vader continued, his voice softening slightly. "You have only begun to discover your power. Join me, and I will complete your training. With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy." "I'll never join you." Luke spat, his voice filled with hatred. "If only you knew the power of the dark side," Vader said, almost wistfully. He paused, the rhythmic sound of his respirator the only noise in the vast chamber. Then, he delivered the final, devastating blow, a blow far more powerful than any lightsaber strike. "Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father." "He told me enough." Luke yelled back, his grief and anger giving him a final surge of defiance. "He told me you killed him." Vader was silent for a long moment. Then, he spoke the words that would shatter Luke's world, that would redefine his past and his future, that would turn his entire existence into a lie. "No," Vader said. "I am your father." The world stopped. The pain in his arm, the fear of the abyss, the hum of the station, it all faded away. There was only that one, impossible, horrifying statement. It couldn't be true. It was a lie. A trick to lure him to the dark side. "No," Luke whispered, shaking his head in denial. "No. That's not true. That's impossible." "Search your feelings," Vader urged, his voice resonating with a terrible, undeniable truth. "You know it to be true." And Luke did. He searched his feelings, and deep within him, beneath the layers of training and the grief and the anger, he felt the connection. The blood connection. The truth of it crashed down on him with the force of a collapsing star. The man who had raised him, Ben Kenobi, his friend and master, had lied to him. The monster he had sworn to destroy, the symbol of everything he hated, was his own father. The anguish was more profound than any physical pain. It was a betrayal that cut to the very core of his being. He looked at Vader, at the black mask that hid the face of Anakin Skywalker, and he saw his own reflection. The vision in the cave. It all made a terrible, horrifying sense. "No," he screamed, the word a raw, primal cry of absolute despair. "No." Vader reached out a hand, the black glove an offer of a dark inheritance. "Luke. You can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It is your destiny. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son." Luke looked from Vader's outstretched hand to the abyss below. A life of darkness with his father, the murderer. Or oblivion. The choice was clear. He let go. He fell into the darkness, tumbling down the reactor shaft, choosing the unknown over the terrible certainty that had been offered to him. He was sucked into an air vein, spat out onto a weather sensor on the underside of the floating city. He hung there, broken, defeated, his body and soul shattered, clinging to life by a thread as the wind howled around him. He had no weapon. No hope. He closed his eyes, and with the last of his strength, he reached out with the Force. Not to his master. Not to Yoda. But to the only other person in the galaxy who might hear him. Leia. Leia, aboard the Millennium Falcon, having just escaped Cloud City with Lando and Chewbacca, suddenly stopped. She turned back, a look of confusion and concern on her face. "Luke," she whispered. "What is it?" Lando asked. "We have to go back," she said, her voice firm. "I know where he is." They turned the Falcon around, flying beneath the city, and found him. He was a small, pathetic figure clinging to the antenna. They brought him aboard, a broken hero returning from his first true battle with the dark side. As the Falcon jumped to hyperspace, fleeing the pursuing Star Destroyers, Luke lay in the medical bay, his severed arm being tended to. But the physical wound was nothing. He stared out at the swirling blue of hyperspace, his mind a maelstrom of pain and confusion. Vader was his father. The rebellion was fighting his father. He was the son of the Dark Lord he had sworn to destroy. He connected with Leia through the Force, a silent, desperate conversation. "Why didn't he tell me?" He projected, his thoughts a jumble of pain. Leia, standing on the bridge, felt his anguish. She didn't understand the how or the why of their connection, only that it was real. She couldn't answer his question. All she could offer was her presence, a silent anchor in the storm of his despair. The galaxy was a much darker and more complicated place than he had ever imagined. And his path forward was now completely, terrifyingly, unknown. The rendezvous with the rebel fleet was a somber affair. The news from Bespin was a devastating blow to the Alliance's morale. Han Solo, a hero of Yavin, was lost, a trophy for a Hutt gangster. And Luke Skywalker, their greatest pilot and a symbol of their hope, had returned broken, missing a hand and a significant piece of his spirit. In the medical frigate, Luke was fitted with a new, cybernetic hand. The synth flesh was a perfect replica of his old one, but he could feel the mechanics beneath, a constant, cold reminder of his failure and his terrible new heritage. He stood with Leia at the viewport, watching the ships of the fleet hang in the blackness of space. "Lando and Chewie have gone to Tatooine," Leia said softly, "to try and rescue Han from Jabba." Luke flexed his new fingers, the movement seamless, artificial. "I have to go back," he said, his voice distant. "Back to Dagobah. I have to finish my training." Leia looked at him, her heart aching with a mixture of concern and a strange, familial protectiveness. The boy who had rescued her from the Death Star was gone. In his place was a man, burdened by a knowledge that would have crushed a lesser person. "Luke, what is it? What's wrong?" He couldn't tell her. Not yet. The truth was a poison he could not bear to share. "It's Vader," he said, the name tasting like ash. "I have to face him again." "You can't," she pleaded. "Look what he did to you." "I have no choice," Luke said, turning to face her. His eyes, once bright with farm boy optimism, were now old, haunted. "It's my destiny." The journey back to Dagobah was different. The swamp was no longer a place of mystery and fear, but one of grim purpose. He found Yoda outside his hut, his small form looking frail, ancient. The Jedi Master's eyes were heavy with a deep, weary sadness. "I have returned to complete the training," Luke said, bowing his head. "No more training do you require," Yoda sighed. "Already know you that which you need," he gestured for Luke to sit. "One thing remains." Vader. You must confront Vader. Then, only then, a Jedi will you be. Luke's heart sank. So it's true, he whispered. Darth Vader is my father. Yoda's ears drooped. He did not deny it. Your father he is, he confirmed, his voice raspy. Told you, did he? Luke nodded, the confirmation a fresh wound. Why, Yoda? Why didn't you and Ben tell me? To protect you, we did, Yoda explained. Afraid. We were afraid for you to know. The path of your father, you could follow. It is the reason for your training. Yoda's breathing became shallow. He was dying. The effort of holding on, of waiting for Luke's return, had taken the last of his strength. Luke, he wheezed, when gone am I, the last of the Jedi will you be, he paused, his breath a faint rattle. Luke, there is another. Sky, walk, With a final, peaceful sigh, Yoda's body vanished, his robes collapsing into an empty pile, just as Obi-Wan's had. He had become one with the Force. Luke sat in the silence of the swamp, truly alone now. The last of the Jedi. The weight of that title was immense. He was the sole heir to 1,000 generations of knowledge, of responsibility. And his final test was to confront and kill his own father. As if summoned by his thoughts, the shimmering form of Obi-Wan Kenobi appeared before him. Yoda will always be with us, the spirit said gently. Luke's grief and confusion boiled over into anger. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice shaking. You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father. Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force, Obi-Wan replied, his expression pained. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view. A certain point of view? Luke scoffed, the words a bitter mockery. Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view, Obi-Wan said, his voice pleading for understanding. Anakin was a good friend. When I first knew him, your father was already a great pilot. But I was amazed how strongly the Force was with him. I took it upon myself to train him as a Jedi. I thought that I could instruct him just as well as Yoda. I was wrong. The confession hung in the air, a burden of guilt carried for over 2 decades. He's more machine now than man, Obi-Wan continued, his voice heavy with regret. Twisted and evil. I can't kill my own father, Luke said, the words a quiet, desperate plea. Then the Emperor has already won, Obi-Wan stated grimly. You were our only hope. Yoda spoke of another, Luke remembered. Obi-Wan's spirit looked away. The other he spoke of is your twin sister. Luke was stunned into silence. A sister. But I have no sister. To protect you both from the Emperor, you were hidden from your father when you were born, Obi-Wan explained. The Emperor knew, as I did, if Anakin were to have any offspring, they would be a threat to him. That is the reason why your sister remains safely anonymous. Luke's mind raced. He thought of his friends, of the connections he had formed. And suddenly, he knew. The feeling he had when he reached out from Bespin. The bond he shared with her. Leia, he breathed. Leia's my sister. Your feelings do you credit, Luke, Obi-Wan said with a sad smile. Bury your feelings deep down, Luke. They do you credit, but they could be made to serve the Emperor. Luke now understood the full scope of the tragedy. His family, torn apart. His father, a monster. His sister, a princess leading a rebellion against him. And he, a Jedi, caught in the middle, tasked with an impossible choice. He left Dagobah a changed man. He was no longer a student. He was a Jedi Knight. His purpose was clear, but his path was not the one his masters had set for him. They saw only one solution, Vader must die. But Luke, the son of Anakin Skywalker, saw another. A sliver of a chance. A fool's hope. He would not kill his father. He would save him. He returned to the rebel fleet, his presence a quiet storm of resolve. He joined the briefing for the Alliance's most audacious plan yet. A second Death Star was under construction in orbit around the forest moon of Endor, personally overseen by the Emperor himself. It was protected by a powerful energy shield projected from a base on the moon. The plan was twofold: a strike team, led by Han Solo, who had been successfully rescued from Jabba the Hutt by Luke and Leia in a daring operation, would land on the moon and destroy the shield generator. Once the shield was down, the rebel fleet, led by Lando Calrissian in the Millennium Falcon, would attack the station and destroy it. It was a trap. Luke could feel it. The Emperor was allowing them to find the station. He was baiting them, drawing the entire rebel fleet into a final, decisive confrontation. He wanted Luke. "I'm coming with you," Luke told Han and Leia as they prepared the stolen Imperial shuttle for the mission to Endor. Leia looked at him, her Force sensitivity, now awakened by Luke's revelation of their shared heritage, tingling with a sense of dread. "You don't have to, Luke. There's a battle to be fought in space." "I have to face him," Luke said simply. He knew his presence on the moon would draw Vader, and in doing so, might keep him away from the space battle, giving Lando and the fleet a better chance. On the forest moon, the beauty of the giant trees and the simple life of the native Ewoks was a stark contrast to the grim reality of their mission. As they journeyed toward the shield generator, Luke felt Vader's presence drawing nearer. He knew he was endangering the mission, endangering his friends. That night, in the Ewok village, he found Leia alone on a walkway. He had to tell her the truth. "Leia," he began, his voice heavy. "Do you remember your mother? Your real mother?" "Just a little bit," she said, her voice soft. "She died when I was very young. She was very beautiful. Kind, but sad." Luke took a deep breath. "The Force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. And my sister has it." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for her to understand. "You have that power too. In time, you'll learn to use it as I have." Leia stared at him, the pieces falling into place. The connection she felt. The strange sense of familiarity. "Luke, what's wrong?" "Vader is here," he said, "on this moon." "How do you know?" "He's my father," Luke said, the words still tasting like poison. Leia recoiled as if struck. "There's good in him," Luke insisted, more to convince himself than her. "I've felt it. He won't turn me over to the Emperor. I can save him. I can turn him back to the good side. I have to try." He told her that he was leaving, that he had to go to Vader alone. If he stayed, he would endanger them all. "Luke, don't," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. "Run away. If you won't, I will." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's my destiny." He held her close. "If I don't make it back, you're the only hope for the Alliance." He surrendered to the Imperial forces, a lone Jedi Knight walking willingly into the lair of the beast. He was brought before Darth Vader on the landing platform. "The Emperor has been expecting you," Vader said, his voice unreadable. "I know, Father," Luke replied, his voice calm, steady. He was no longer the frightened boy from Bespin. He was a Jedi. "So, you have accepted the truth." "I've accepted the truth that you were once Anakin Skywalker, my father," Luke said, his gaze unwavering. "That name no longer has any meaning for me," Vader stated flatly. "It is the name of your true self," Luke insisted. "You've only forgotten. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate." "It is too late for me, son," Vader said, a flicker of something, perhaps regret, in his sin-sized voice. He led Luke towards the Emperor's throne room. The Emperor will show you the true nature of the Force. He is your master now. As they ascended, Luke made one last, desperate plea. Come with me. Obi-Wan once thought as you do, Vader replied, turning to face him. The black mask was impenetrable, but Luke could feel the storm of emotion behind it. You don't know the power of the dark side. I must obey my master. I will not turn, Luke said, his resolve hardening. And you'll be forced to kill me. If that is your destiny, Vader said grimly. Search your feelings, Father. You can't do this. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate. For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then, Vader turned away. It is too late for me, son. The doors to the throne room slid open, revealing the cavernous chamber and the frail, cloaked figure of the Emperor, waiting on his throne. The trap was sprung. The final confrontation was about to begin. The Emperor's throne room was a place of chilling serenity. Great windows looked out upon the swirling green chaos of the Battle of Endor, a silent, epic ballet of destruction. At the center of it all sat Emperor Palpatine, a withered husk of a man radiating an ancient, malevolent power that dwarfed even Vader's. His smile was a gash in his pale, wrinkled face, his yellow eyes burning with an evil as old as the stars. Welcome, young Skywalker, the Emperor rasped, his voice a dry whisper of decaying silk. I have been expecting you. Luke stood before him, his Jedi robes a simple brown against the stark black and grey of the chamber. He was calm, centered, his shields of Force energy held firmly in place. He had prepared for this moment, meditated on it. He would not be broken by fear or anger. You no longer need those, Palpatine said, gesturing a claw-like hand toward the binders on Luke's wrists. Vader stepped forward and, with a hiss of releasing mechanisms, removed them. He is your prize, my young apprentice, the Emperor said to Vader. But for now, he is my guest. As are your friends, out there. He pointed toward the window. The rebel fleet, having just emerged from hyperspace, was flying directly into the Imperial fleet's guns. As you can see, my young apprentice, your friends have failed, Palpatine purred, savoring Luke's dawning horror. Now witness the firepower of this fully armed and operational battle station. Fire at will, Commander. Luke watched, helpless, as a massive green turbolaser beam shot from the Death Star's superlaser, striking a rebel Mon Calamari cruiser. The ship vanished in a silent, blossoming explosion, a beautiful and terrible flower of death. Many bot-hands died to bring us the information about this battle station, Palpatine sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. And now, your alliance will die as we celebrate the final end of your insignificant rebellion. The Emperor's plan was diabolical. The station's shield was still up. The rebel fleet was trapped between the Death Star's superlaser and the Imperial Navy. It was a slaughter. Your fleet is lost, Palpatine hissed, turning his yellow eyes on Luke. And your friends on the Endor moon are walking into a trap, as well. My legion of crack troops awaits them, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Oh, I'm afraid the deflector shield will be quite operational when your friends arrive. The scope of the Emperor's victory was absolute. Every hope the rebellion had was being systematically extinguished before Luke's eyes. It was a calculated assault, not just on the Alliance, but on Luke's soul. Palpatine was feeding on his despair, his fear, his growing anger. Everything that has transpired has done so according to my design, the Emperor gloated. Your friends, out there on the Sanctuary Moon, are walking into a trap, as is your rebel fleet. It was I who allowed the Alliance to learn the location of the shield generator. It is I who has drawn your fleet to this place. It is an ambush, and you have led them to it. Luke's control began to fray. He could feel the deaths of the rebel soldiers, the terror of his friends. The dark side was a seductive whisper, promising the power to end this, to make the Emperor pay. "Come, boy," Palpatine taunted, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "See your father's lightsaber," he gestured, and Luke's weapon, taken from him upon his surrender, floated from a side table and into the Emperor's hand. "It is a Jedi's weapon. Much like your father's. You want this, don't you?" He held it out to Luke. "Take it. Strike me down with it. Give in to your anger. With each passing moment, you make yourself more my servant." Luke stared at the lightsaber, then at the grinning face of the Emperor. He could feel Vader watching him, a silent, brooding presence. This was the test. The final temptation. "No," Luke said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned away, back to the window, forcing himself to watch the destruction, to absorb the pain without letting it turn to hate. "You will not be turned," Luke stated, his resolve hardening into a diamond point. "You are a Jedi, like I am. Like my father before me. So be it." "Jedi," the Emperor snarled, his patience finally snapping. If Luke would not be turned, he would be destroyed. The Emperor rose from his throne, and a torrent of blue force lightning erupted from his fingertips, engulfing Luke in a cage of pure agony. Luke screamed, his body convulsing as the lightning tore through him, setting every nerve on fire. It was a pain beyond anything he had ever imagined, a raw, elemental force of pure hatred. He collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony, his defenses shattered. The Emperor cackled, a sound of pure, unadulterated evil. "Young fool. Only now, at the end, do you understand?" The lightning stopped. Luke lay gasping on the floor, smoke rising from his black tunic. "Your feeble skills are no match for the power of the dark side," Palpatine spat. "You have paid the price for your lack of vision." He unleashed another, more intense barrage of lightning. Luke screamed again, his vision going white with pain. He was dying. He could feel his life force being ripped away. In his agony, his gaze fell upon the figure of his father. Darth Vader stood motionless, watching his son being tortured to death, a silent observer to the Emperor's final victory. "Father, please!" Luke cried out, his voice a roar, desperate plea. "Help me!" In that moment, something broke inside the black shell of Darth Vader. He looked at the Emperor, his master, reveling in his cruelty. Then he looked at his son, his own flesh and blood, being destroyed. The boy had been right. He had seen the good in him, a good Vader himself had thought long dead. The vision of Luke, so full of hope, so committed to the light, refusing to strike him down, refusing to give in to the hate that had consumed Anakin's own life. It was too much. The conflict that had been raging within him for years, since the moment he learned he had a son, finally reached its conclusion. He was not a machine. He was not just a tool of the Emperor. He was Anakin Skywalker. And he would not let his son die. With a roar that was a mixture of mechanical fury and human anguish, Vader moved. He grabbed the Emperor from behind, lifting the frail, shocked figure into the air. Palpatine screamed, his cackling turning to a shriek of rage and surprise, twisting his head around to blast his treacherous apprentice with his own lightning. The blue energy poured into Vader, coursing through his cybernetic systems, shorting out his life support. The suit that had kept him alive for 2 decades was now killing him. But he did not let go. He held on, fueled by a final, desperate act of love for his son. He stumbled towards the reactor shaft, the Emperor writhing in his grasp. With a final, monumental effort, Anakin Skywalker hurled his master, the architect of all his pain and the galaxy's suffering, into the abyss. The Emperor's scream echoed up the shaft as he fell, disappearing into a massive explosion of blue energy that rocked the entire throne room. Silence. Vader collapsed to the floor, his respirator coming in ragged, failing gasps. The reign of the Sith was over. Luke, his strength failing, crawled to his father's side. "Father," he whispered. He helped the massive, broken form to his feet and began to drag him towards the hangar bay. The Death Star was shaking, rocked by explosions. Lando and the rebel fleet, their path cleared by the destruction of the Executor and the deactivation of the shield, had begun their final attack run. "Luke," Vader rasped, his voice weak, the synthesizer failing. "Help me take this mask off." "But you'll die," Luke protested. "Nothing can stop that now," Anakin Skywalker said, his own voice, faint and human, emerging from the mangled vocoder. "Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." With trembling hands, Luke slowly, carefully, removed the helmet and the mask. He finally saw the face of his father. It was not a monster. It was a pale, scarred old man, his face a tragic landscape of a life of pain and regret. But his eyes, for the first time, were clear. The yellow taint of the dark side was gone. They were the eyes of Anakin Skywalker. "Now, go, my son," Anakin whispered. "Leave me." "No," Luke said, tears streaming down his face. "You're coming with me." "I'll not leave you here." He tried to lift him, but he was too weak. Anakin smiled, a faint, sad smile. "You were right about me," he said, his voice barely audible. "Tell your sister, you were right." His eyes fluttered closed. His head fell back. And with a final, peaceful sigh, the man who was Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, died. Luke stayed there for a moment, his grief a profound, silent ache. He had saved his father. And he had lost him. He managed to carry his father's body to a shuttle and escape the Death Star just as it exploded in a brilliant flash of light, a second star in the sky above Endor. The war was over. On the forest moon, the celebration was already beginning. The rebels and the Ewoks rejoiced together, a wild, joyous party in the firelight. Leia, Han, and Lando were reunited, their faces lit with victory and relief. Leia felt Luke's return before she saw him. She broke away from the celebration and found him alone, some distance from the village. He had built a pyre. The empty armor of Darth Vader lay upon it. Luke ignited it, and watched silently as the flames consumed the last vestiges of his father's dark past. He rejoined his friends, a sad but peaceful smile on his face. Leia hugged him. "I'm glad you're back," she said. "I am too," he replied. Han, ever the pragmatist, clapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, kid. You did it." Luke looked at his friends. He looked at the celebration. He looked up at the stars, where the spirits of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, and now, a redeemed Anakin Skywalker, watched over him, smiling. The Empire was gone. The galaxy was free. But a new task lay before him. The Jedi had fallen due to their dogma, their fear of attachment, their inability to see the person behind the prophecy. Obi-Wan, in his long exile, had learned this lesson. He had raised Luke not in a cold temple, but in a loving home. He had taught him not just control, but compassion. He had allowed Luke to be human. And in the end, it was that humanity, that love for his friends, that compassion for his father, that had saved the galaxy. Not by destroying the monster, but by redeeming the man. Luke Skywalker, the first of the new Jedi, stood with his family, forged not by blood alone, but by love and sacrifice. His path was clear. He would rebuild the Jedi Order. Not as it was, but as it should have been. An order that understood that the greatest strength was not in detachment, but in connection. Not in the absence of emotion, but in the mastery of it. An order built on the foundation of a single, pivotal choice made on a dusty desert world so many years ago. A choice to be a guardian, not from a distance, but up close. A choice to be a father, in all the ways that truly mattered. The future of the galaxy was bright, and for the first time in a generation, it was a future of hope.